Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Thursday, November 19, 2020 session in our series on digital transformation in traditional and new industries in Asia. I'm Richard Dasher. I direct the U.S. Asia Technology Management Center that produces this series. We want to start off by thanking our 21 member companies for support of our center and therefore support of this program. Also want to remind everyone that if you can stay afterward after 5:50, we'll have an informal discussion after the formal seminar is over as well. Also, please be sure and write your questions in the chat box for this Zoom meeting, and I will relay them to our speaker as we go along. So we've had a great series. This is the 10th and final session in our series this fall, and we've had several company CEOs. We've had a number of technology providers, as well as some traditional industries that have presented. And today, for a keynote, we have the person who wrote the book on digital transformation, Mr. Thomas Siebel, whose new book is Digital Transformation, Survive and Thrive in an Era of Mass Extinction. And to get things started off, I would like to ask a very special friend to introduce Mr. Siebel. This is Professor Chris Manning, who is the Thomas M. Siebel Professor of Machine Learning and also Professor of Linguistics and Computer Science at Stanford. Chris is the director of the Stanford AI Lab. He's also associate director of the Institute for Human Artificial Intelligence, and he is a member of the executive committee of Mr. Siebel's Digital Transformation Institute, which is sponsored mostly by Mr. Siebel's company, C3.ai. So I want to ask Chris if you would introduce our speaker today.
Thank you very much, Richard. Yeah, so I'm delighted to be able to introduce Tom Siebel. There's a lot that you can say about Tom Siebel, but I'll try and keep it fairly brief. So at the moment, Tom's main role is as founder and CEO of C3.ai, which is a platform as a service company, which is really focused on developing the tools for providing a platform for enterprise scale, big data, doing predictive analytics, AI, and IoT solutions. Those people who are of a reasonable age perhaps remember an earlier time when Tom was extremely well known as the founder and chief executive officer of Siebel Systems. So Siebel Systems was really the company that defined the customer relationship management marketplace and grew at an astounding rate in the sort of decade, I guess, from the late 90s to the mid 2000s, and then it was merged into Oracle Corporation. Tom has also been a long-term and exceedingly generous and supportive contributor to universities, principally through the Thomas and Stacy Siebel Foundation. So really a number of universities have benefited enormously from his generosity, which include some of the institutions he's most closely associated with from his own degrees, which include UIUC and our competition across the bay of UC Berkeley. But we're also very grateful that Tom has also been strongly involved in supporting Stanford University. And then for sort of broader efforts at philanthropy, Richard already mentioned a major recent initiative, the C3 Digital Transformation Initiative, which is really looking at how to scale out some of the techniques that Tom's going to talk about today to major societal problems, including ones like the current COVID-19 pandemic, and then also looking at others as education. I'm probably should about stop now, but one last thing I'll do is just very briefly stick up for the humanities. An interesting fact is that all three of Richard, me, and Tom have a degree in the humanities, since Tom's undergrad degree was a Bachelor of History. Though before you doubt his competence, he also picked up a computer science degree and an MBA later on. So I'm delighted to introduce Tom Siebel.
Thanks very much, Chris. And Tom, let me echo Chris's welcome and get things started off. So digital technologies are everywhere. What would you say is really the essence of digital transformation? What do you mean that's different from digital transformation from just using digital technology?
It's a great question, Richard. And after we sold Siebel Systems to Oracle in 2006, and I began to kind of think about what was happening next and talk to many CEOs in companies in Shanghai and Tokyo and Paris, London, New York, San Francisco, Chicago. All of a sudden, as we get into, particularly into 2009, 10, 11, 12, increasingly you would hear this concept of digital transformation, and it was coming from the CEO, and it was being delivered as a mandate. It was something of great urgency, and it was something that we needed to do, and we needed to do now, whether we were in the aerospace business or the power business or the oil and gas business, travel and transportation. We needed to digitally transform. And candidly, I found the discussions a little bit mystifying. And I was thinking, digital transformation as opposed to what? As opposed to analog transformation? Like, what does this mean? And as I would, talk to these people and try to find out, what they meant by digital transformation, it was clear that it was important. And in fact, it was existential, but there wasn't really a common understanding. No two people had the same idea of what it was. And so I gave the idea, some thought before putting a pen to paper a couple of years ago in trying to come up with a conception of what these people were talking about. And now I think I know what it is and what the motivation is about. And we have seen, the information technology business in the last, say, 4 decades grow from roughly a $200 billion business to today almost $3 trillion. And we've seen, and the growth rate is now accelerating. And we've seen a move from mainframe computing to mini computing to personal computing to cloud computing. And we've transitioned from bespoke, Fortran and ALGOL programming to, relational database technology, to enterprise application software, and now into, AI and predictive analytics. And every time we brought these new technologies to market, whether it was the mini computer or the personal computer, there was enormous resistance, to each of these, to any one of these technologies, relational database systems, enterprise application software. And you would have the CIO who was in charge of a technology transition in Tokyo, in Shanghai, in New York, doesn't matter. They were not going to adopt this next generation of technology. Well, that person would invariably get replaced. Okay. And, the idea today, when we think back at this transition that's taken place, this information age, this post-industrial society that has emerged in the last 4 decades, today it is inconceivable that we could run a company without computers, without personal computers, without smartphones, without accounting systems, without computer-aided manufacturing, without CRM systems. You simply could not compete. You couldn't run your business, and you would be out of business. Okay, now let's get back to this existential event of digital transformation. What's been going on? if we look at the kind of evolution of business and we look at what has happened in the last 20 years, in fact, we've been going through a mass extinction event in the corporate world. And in fact, substantially more than 50% of the companies that were on the Fortune 500 list at the beginning of the century are gone. I believe it's 64, it was 52%. Okay, when I published Digital Transformation, I think it's 64% today of the Fortune 500 companies that were on the list as of January of 2000 are gone. And I mean, they've just disappeared. Where is Westinghouse? Where is Toys R Us? Where is Kodak? I mean, these companies have disappeared. And so there is a mass extinction event going on in the corporate world. And it's very scary. I mean, you know, in the last year, 10,000 retail outlets have closed in the United States. And this is not primarily recession driven, it's technology driven. You know, these brick and mortar outlets are being replaced by you know, a new generation of retailing that takes place online. We're seeing disruption in travel and transportation by companies like Uber and Tesla. We're seeing disruption in hospitality industry with companies like Airbnb. We're seeing disruption in the financial services industry with companies like Robinhood. These companies with new DNA, okay, that are simply taking over markets, and meanwhile other companies are going out of business. So I think there's an analog when you think in geologic time, and you think about the speciation of the planet. And this is what I talk about in my book, Digital Transformation, where, you know, we've had, you know, the speciation of the planet. This is a process that was described perhaps most accurately, you know, in the middle of the 19th century by Charles Darwin in his work, you know, on the origin of species, where he identified natural selection as the means by which speciation took place. And Darwin describes speciation, you know, the natural selection process, is very much a continuous process that kind of moved upward and to the right, kind of like Moore's law. And it was a continuous process that took place through gradual change over millennia, or not millennia, millions and millions of years. Okay, and then there was a problem with his idea that, you know, he couldn't explain that there were these dislocations in the fossil records. And his explanation was that, well, we just haven't found those fossils yet. And it wasn't until, I believe, 1972 that an evolutionary biologist at Harvard by the name of Stephen Jay Gould conceived of this idea called punctuated equilibrium. And he said, the speciation of the planet was not a continuous event. In fact, it was an event that has been driven by a number of kind of massive disruptions. And if we look at, you know, the planet's been around, I think, about 6 billion years. Okay, and if we look at the last, you know, basically, you know, 400 million years alone, there have been 5 mass extinction events. One was associated with the oxidation of the planet, with oxygen coming. And so we had to, so that, you know, I think 96% of the species on Earth became extinct. The most recent event took place about 63 million years ago. And it's known as this KT extinction, with which we're all familiar. Which this is when the meteors hit the Yucatan, and we had mass, you know, all the volcanoes erupted around the world. We had mass climate change, and something like 84% of the species on Earth became extinct. And the most famous of which would have been the dinosaurs. And the dinosaurs was a very, very successful species. It had been on the planet for order of 150 million years, and then it became extinct. Now, and when these extinction events happened, they were followed by mass respeciation events, where all of a sudden you would have these species just created out of nowhere with new DNA, which would fill these voids, okay, in the ecosystem with new species. And in the case of the K2 extinction, this worked out pretty well for us because of the space that the dinosaurs occupied. We had mammals filled that space and ultimately Homo sapiens. So far that story's worked out pretty well. And so if you look at what is going on, and I would describe that if you think about the evolution of technology and the evolution of business, when you think about it, and I am, as Chris mentioned, a student of history, and in fact, a student of history of science, and I study that, I read about that a lot. And we look about the intersection of technology and sociology. These have been highly disruptive events, whether this is the discovery of fire, okay, the domestication of agriculture, the domestication of dogs, the wheel, the Gutenberg Press, the steam engine, the Jacquard loom, the transistor. These have been highly disruptive technologies. And the consequences of these technologies have had, really significant adverse changes in the world. Let's talk about the Gutenberg Press. Well, an incredibly important technology that allowed the Bible to be printed in many, many languages, so that we didn't have to rely solely on the magic show that was delivered in Latin, okay, in the cathedral every Sunday. For this person who would interpret the word of God, we can interpret the word of God ourselves. And the result was, Martin Luther and others who came up with this historical event that we now know as the Reformation. Now, I would argue that the idea of the Gutenberg Press and the printed word was generally a good thing. Okay, at the same time, you can draw a straight line between that and the Reformation that resulted in hundreds of years of religious wars in Europe, right? Ending in the Treaty of Westphalia in the 16th century, I believe. 100 years war, 30 years war, people killing each other kind of over nothing. And then if we look at, other intersections of technology with mankind, like the steam engine and the Jacquard loom, and these would be seminal in the Industrial Revolution. And most people would argue that the Industrial Revolution was a good thing. We employ more people live longer, they live healthier, their quality of life is better. And yet, you can draw a straight line between the invention, between these inventions that resulted in the Industrial Revolution and, World War I, World War II, labor abuses, child labor, labor unions, which were a natural response to the abuses that took place. Charles Dickens for details. Again, labor unions, Karl Marx, communism. Some of these consequences have been, enormously deleterious. And now let's look at technology. So now all of a sudden we have, we talked about technology. I talked about what's happened in the last 4 decades in technology, and we see accelerating growth now. And we have a new step function of information technology that is really accelerating growth, and it's changing everything. And this step function of information technology is, in fact, highly disruptive. And I would say it includes these technology vectors that we know of as elastic cloud computing, popularized by Microsoft and AWS and others. Big data, where we have now the ability to store, the cost of storage has kind of gone to zero, and we can store and manipulate data sets that were previously inconceivable into hundreds of petabytes or zettabytes or yottabytes. I mean, we can deal with inconceivable data sets. This phenomenon called the Internet of Things, where we are censoring value chains, including human beings, so that all the devices in these value chains, be it the power grid, be it oil and gas, travel, transportation, human beings themselves, are being censored so that we can remotely sense the state of devices and and beings, okay, in real time. Whether this is a smart meter, whether it's a smart thermostat, whether it's a Fitbit, whether it's a heart monitor, whether it's a phaser measurement unit on a power transmission line that's giving us power quality signals at, say, 90 hertz cycles. So today we have, order of 50 to 100 billion of these sensors being deployed around the world. And these, in turn, we take these technologies of elastic cloud computing, which creates infinite computing capacity and storage capacity that's available essentially for free. Okay, this big data phenomenon, which changes everything about the way we can compute. We could talk about that if you want, but I think it has less to do with the size of the data sets that we're dealing with than the way that we are dealing with those data sets, due to the fact that we have today virtually no restrictions on computational capacity and storage. We no longer have to compute based upon sample sets. We used to compute based upon sample sets because we were dealing with processors that might be 8-bit processors that processed at 300 kilohertz cycles. And today we can process on infinite numbers of 64-bit machines in the virtual cloud that are doing 64-bit floating point operations at, say, 3 gigahertz cycles. That is infinite computing capacity and infinite storage capacity. And so with big data, we can use all the data in the system, and so there is no sampling error, and it changes everything about the way we compute. And the bottom line is we're able to solve problems that were previously unsolvable with predictive analytics. How does this get to this extinction event that we're living through? So where does this come together with this extinction threat that we're talking about in the corporate world? Okay, it is a fact that these companies are going out of business. Okay, and in the vacuum that is being replaced, okay, we see these companies with new DNA that we read about in the China Daily, the Financial Times, or the Wall Street Journal every day, and we have these companies with new DNA that are all about. Let's think about Tesla. I don't know whether Tesla is going to be a successful company in the long run or not, but they most certainly have disrupted the automotive industry. And what is this about? This is about elastic cloud computing, big data, and the Internet of Things on wheels. Okay, let's look at the rest of travel and transportation with Uber. No cars, no drivers, and they're completely upending the transportation business again with big data, the Internet of Things, and AI. How about retailing? I mean, if you're a physical retailer looking down the barrel of the gun that Amazon has pointed at you, which is all about all barrels at elastic cloud computing, big data, IoT, and AI focused at retailing, I mean, you're in a world of hurt. So we have these companies with new DNA that are filling these vacuums formed by these companies that are going out of business. Okay, so let's go talk about leadership. We have visionary leaders, okay, in Asia. We have visionary leaders in Europe, and we have visionary leaders in North and South America we have CEOs, and we all know who they are in many industries, who are just waiting around until they get their retirement, okay? And then there are those who are doing their jobs and making the decision that unless I reinvent this business will not survive in the long run. And that's what digital transformation is all about. Digital transformation, in my opinion, is about applying these technologies to fundamentally transform the way that we develop products and services, the way that we manufacture products, the way that we create services, the way that we serve customers, the way that we deliver these services. So digital transformation is fundamentally about changing everything about the way that we operate a business so that you can survive in the 21st century. And it is, in fact, an existential event, and that is what is driving this, in my opinion.
Okay, Tom, thank you very much. Everybody who's in our audience, now you know why I enjoyed Tom's book so much. It just takes you off on these wonderful wild rides that are very logical and that really, I love the model of punctuated equilibrium where you have change that is kind of progressing incrementally for a long time, and then suddenly you have these major events. And really, each one kind of being accompanied by a mass extinction is also very impressive. I want to ask a question. We're getting questions from the audience already, but I want to ask one follow-up question to this. Most of the technology events you've talked about are in themselves punctuating things. What about the current COVID-19 pandemic? Do you see that as having a further punctuating impact, or is that just kind of, you don't have to worry about external things so much?
Well, I think that what we're seeing in this COVID, we're clearly not in a post-COVID economy. We are in a COVID economy. Okay, and um, it is unquestionably accelerating digital transformation across all industries, and it has proved as an accelerant, okay, to adopt these two new technologies so that companies can reinvent themselves, okay, and survive in a post-COVID world. Do I think the post-COVID world will look much different than the pre-COVID world? Actually, by the time I think it runs this course, I don't think it will. I think it will. I think it'll look, you know, I think some things will have changed. Some things will have changed for better. Some things will have changed for the worse. But fundamentally, I think it's going to look a lot like it did pre-COVID. That being said, COVID is absolutely accelerating companies' adoption of these technologies and their desire to digitally transform.
Okay. In these kind of mass extinction events, and in the examples you've used so far, you have a lot of new DNA. You've got companies like Robinhood that you mentioned, and other companies that are coming up and eating the lunches of the old incumbents. But the idea of surviving in this era of mass extinction. So how can an existing company really transform itself? You had some great case studies in the book. I wonder what's your favorite one for a kind of existing company that did a good job?
I think, probably the most impressive company that I've seen digitally transforming itself is a company called Enel, based in Rome. And Enel is the largest utility operator in the free world. So this is very much a kind of early 20th century technology, the power grid. And if we look at the National Academy of Sciences, will identify the power grid as the most significant scientific achievement of the 20th century. And at Enel, they operate, this is a very kind of old school business, but they operate at some scale. So outside of China, this would be the largest grid operator in the world. They have 60 million meters in 40 countries. Putting that in perspective, I think we have about 37 million meters in Japan. We have about 10 million meters in Korea. 60 million meters in 40 countries is a pretty big grid infrastructure. In the United States, we have 100 million meters, okay, that are serviced by 3,250 utilities, believe it or not. So the average utility in the United States is 50,000 meters, rough numbers.
Wow.
But they have a very visionary leader there by the name of Francisco Starace, who was the first to adopt smart grid technologies, the first to install smart meters at mass scale. And he made the decision about 2014 to digitally transform his business. And they operate in Brazil, and they operate in Eastern Europe, and they operate in Italy and Spain and Portugal and Russia. And they made the decision to close 23 data centers around the world and move all of their applications in the cloud, and then adopt AI at mass scale. And when we apply AI to the grid, it's generally called smart grid analytics. And in these grid infrastructures, we can apply AI and predictive analytics to deliver safer energy, to deliver more renewable energy, cleaner energy, more reliable energy, low cost energy at mass scale. And so at Enel, in a very short period of time, these guys have closed 23 data centers, moved 3,000 enterprise applications into the public cloud. They're deploying order of 100 smart grid analytics applications that do everything from distributed energy resource management, which is a very difficult problem about integration of renewables into the grid, to AI-based predictive maintenance for power distribution assets. In a grid infrastructure this large, there are hundreds of millions of physical assets, transformers, substations, reclosers, capacitance banks. And when these devices fail without notice, they can be catastrophic. And when the lights go out in Rome, people die. And so we can use, for example, predictive analytics to predict device failure in advance and replace devices before they fail. So these guys at Enel, this is the largest production AI deployment on Earth today. They've aggregated about 100 billion rows of data from 50 enterprise applications, I think roughly 50 instances of SAP, Siebel systems, Salesforce, 2 different SCADA systems, Atlas, Maximo, what have you. They aggregate the data from today, 57 million sensors, 42 million smart meters, and then they go out to the extranet for weather, terrain, social media. That alone, they update 62 billion times a day, 62 billion times a day. They process these transactions at the rate they arrive, okay, and they're delivering cleaner energy, safer energy, more reliable energy, lower cost energy, and their economic benefit. So this is it's a win for the environment, it's a win for the economy, it's a win for the shareholder, for the consumer, and it's a huge win for the shareholders. He is delivering, Francisco Starace is delivering today, if you look at his annual report, 5.1 billion euros in recurring economic benefit to his shareholders from this digital transformation effort. Hey, this is significantly non-zero. So that is, I think, the largest, most sophisticated digital transformation event that I'm aware of taking place on the planet, and it is unquestionably the largest commercial application of artificial intelligence.
That's amazing, the scale of what they're doing. Do you think it's mostly the CEO's contribution? I mean, why have they been able to be successful when so many other companies have failed at even smaller scale digital transformation?
I think it's okay to fail. You just need to fail fast. And in my experience in the projects that we've been involved in, at the United States Air Force, at the Army Futures Command, at companies like Koch Industries, Engie in Paris, Enel, Standard Chartered Bank in Singapore, Bank of America. Every one of these initiatives that's succeeding at enterprise scale is being driven personally by the chief executive officer. Now, this is a new development in information technology, because in the last 40 years, we've seen the person driving the train has been the chief information officer. Well, the chief information officer is in the back of the train, okay, as it relates to digital transformation. And the people who are running this are visionary CEOs in each case who are partnering with a visionary, a new role that's called the chief digital officer. And the chief digital officer's office now is most frequently next to the chief executive officer. And these people are, personally involved with vendors, personally involved with the initiatives, and driving the change. By the way, the hard part is not the technology. Okay, today we have trivialized the problem in terms of technology. People get hung up about the technology problems, and the real problem has to do with the change management. Okay, if you think about these companies that might have 70 or 100 or 200,000 employees in 40 countries, all of which are usually highly socialized countries with with strong union contracts. I mean, we need to retrain, remotivate, okay, should fundamentally change the nature of work for hundreds of thousands of people at a time. So the change management is just the extent to which companies are realizing the economic benefit is associated with the extent to which companies are succeeding at the change management. The other thing that I see about companies that are succeeding is they're not trying to boil the ocean. Okay. They're not looking at multi-year projects. They are boiling the ocean. Okay. But they're doing it, one quart at a time. Okay. And each project they're taking on, they want to see economic benefit accrue to their constituents, to their customers, to their shareholders, and to society at large. And they want to see it within 6 months. Okay. And they measure success based upon annual economic benefit achieved, not by whether it's live or not by whether they met the development milestone. What's the economic benefit that we're returning to our stakeholders, and social benefit? That's how they measure success. But bite-sized projects, get it live, realize the return in 6 to 9 months, and then do 3 more, and then do 3 more, and then do 10 more. And so we see it projects, companies like Enel. Enel has 200 projects in flight. At Royal Dutch Shell, they have 200 projects in flight. I mean, these are massive digital transformations.
I think that we're seeing what real visionary leadership is because somebody sitting in your chair has just described it, right? I mean, you have described having the big picture and yet seeing the small concrete ways that you need to move aggressively to make it happen. We had a couple of questions from the audience that I want to get to right now, and they have to do with industries that seem to be resistant to change. The first one is healthcare, where there really is, it's a highly regulated industry. The economics are very strange anyway. But what do you see about the prospects for digital transformation in healthcare industries?
There is no question in my mind, okay, that precision health will be the largest commercial application of artificial intelligence. I mean, number one, the social and economic benefits are attainable. They are obvious. We can aggregate the healthcare records and the genome sequences, say for the population in the United States or France or Germany or Japan, okay, into a unified federated image. And this is, believe it or not, it's a trivial problem. Okay. And then we can build machine learning models where the economic benefit is so immediate and so obvious. For example, disease prediction. It is within our grasp today to be able to predict with very high levels of precision who is going to be diagnosed with what disease in the next 5 years. Say it's diabetes or breast cancer, or whatever it may be. Okay, and then we can take, when we deal with, but when we're dealing with diseases like diabetes or heart disease, okay, this gives us the opportunity to intervene clinically and avoid the diagnosis. The economic benefits are obvious and they're immediate and they're substantial. Okay, what's the second area that we'll see? Well, we can, when we include the genome sequences of this population in the unified federated image, we will be able to deploy genome-specific medical protocols to treat these diseases in much more highly efficacious, lower cost ways with these, telemedicine technologies that we have available as part of, as digital transformation hits healthcare, we'll be able to reach, much larger and traditionally underserved populations. Adverse drug reaction, AI-assisted medicine. I don't believe for a minute, this bunk that we see on these TV ads that AI is going to replace physicians. No way, no how. It's not going to happen. But there is no question that we will have AI-assisted medicine. Okay, where we will be providing more information to physicians so they can have more accurate diagnoses. And so AI-assisted diagnosis, disease prediction, adverse drug reaction, genome-specific medical protocols, distance medicine with telemedicine. I mean, the social economic benefits are staggering. They're immediate. They're obvious, and this will be the unquestionably the largest commercial industrial application of artificial intelligence.
So in that case, the people who are really resistant to change, a lot of them are the individual physicians. And you can assume that you'll have a replacement of DNA with a new set of physicians with really different skill sets and different perspectives, as well as, being willing to change more. But
Absolutely.
one of the things I kind of worry about is whether the
nature of
university.
work will change, and this is not new.
Yeah.
I mean, let's think with the invention of the automobile. Okay, I mean, there used to be people who were teamsters, right? And
Yeah.
all those jobs were replaced. Well, and you can either. The question is, do you want to get on the train or be on the tracks? Okay, and there will be. I mean, will there be a dislocation where jobs will be eliminated? Absolutely. Did we eliminate jobs with the Industrial Revolution? Absolutely. Did we eliminate jobs, with every other technological advance that took place? Absolutely. But we adopted, okay, and we created from every one of these developments, whether it was agriculture, the press, the Industrial Revolution, we created in some cases, orders of magnitude more jobs than created before. This will happen here too. Now, we have a problem with our workforces, and you talk about resistance. I mean, people are scared of change, and they're particularly scared of artificial intelligence. And by the way, for some very good reasons. Okay, they're scared of artificial intelligence. This is a technology that's being, I think, abused and misused, okay, in many sectors, and we can talk about that. I feel very strongly about it. Okay, but the decision that we're going to have to make as leaders and as chief executive officers, are we going to replace our workforce or are we going to retrain our workforce? Okay, I strongly recommend the latter. Okay, but it does come down to that. Okay. And, we look at what's going on with, distance learning technologies that have been spawned out of, Stanford and name the University of Tokyo, Tsinghua, wherever it might be. I mean, we have, amazing wealth of training technologies that are available to retrain workforces. And either we retrain our workforce or we dislocate them. And so the visionary CEOs are retraining their workforces.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Sometimes I worry that the education sector needs to be more forward-looking to see the future skills people are going to need. It tends to happen by osmosis rather than by, kind of vision. Another place where one of our audience members has mentioned vision is kind of not exactly a major part of the institution is the government. How do you see the digital transformation of the government proceeding? And do you think that we will have to have a real visionary, for instance, as president of the United States, or is this something that will happen kind of regardless of who's in the office?
Oh, no, I think it will require vision. In Italy, in Japan, you're certainly seeing the vision in spades in China. Okay, read the 12th five-year plan, read the 13th five-year plan. We're about to see the 14th five-year plan. I mean, it is all about vision. And I think we're seeing, the leadership there is very clear. And they're making just enormous strides in this area. And I think, some of it candidly is a little bit threatening for the rest of the world. But I think, if we look at digital transformation and we look at AI, I think that, this will be applied to all government processes, smart cities, We'll be using AI in tax systems, in welfare systems, certainly in healthcare systems. We'll be using AI in defense in a huge way. I mean, we're engaged in open warfare today with China as it relates to applying AI to defense, and this is in fact existential. And this is a war. I think
Yeah.
Vladimir Putin said in 2017, September of 2017, whoever wins the war on AI will dominate the world. I believe that's true, and I don't believe it's going to be Russia. It will either be China or it will be the United States, and this is this is very, very real, and it's very concerning. But absolutely transform all public service and government systems.
So specific, Taiwan has appointed a digital minister, right? Kind of the equivalent of a chief data officer. And I wonder if, do you think that we need one?
Absolutely. And we need vision and we need leadership. And I think that, the United States has been, singularly lacking in that, not simply in the last 4 years, but, in the last 20.
Yeah.
Okay. And if we're not careful, we're going to get rolled by China. And again, read the 13th five-year plan for details. I mean, these guys are very serious. They're very smart. They're very well trained, and they are getting after it in a very deliberate fashion.
So with this AI competition between the U.S. and China, do you think that what is the way the U.S. should respond to this? Okay, this is one of these, if it's one of these mass extinction events, is there something where we cooperate in certain areas like drug development or healthcare, or do we really have to go our own separate way?
Wow. Well, I think that the probability of cooperation on AI as it relates to defense and intelligence systems between us and China is highly unlikely. I mean, this is.
Yeah, with defense systems for sure. No. Yeah.
And this is open, hostile, and I think what we're looking at is going to be, the fundamental test of two diametrically opposed political philosophies. Where in China, we have this top-down command and control state, run by the party with the NRDC, and they publish the 12th plan, the 13th plan, the 14th year plan, and then everybody kind of operates in lockstep. And these people are incredibly well trained, okay, and they work tirelessly, and they will achieve their objectives. Now, in the United States, we get into the West, okay, in Europe and the United States, where we have a much more free market economy. It's much messier, okay, where we're relying on people in storefronts in London and the Bronx and garages in Palo Alto to invent technologies. This is how we do it in the West. And so I think there's a place for the government to provide leadership and incentives and say that we're going to do it. And we do not see this leadership there today. Candidly, all of these discussions going on that took place in the last presidential debates, I think were 99% of what they talked about, honestly, it was candidly silly. Okay, there's important issues, none of which were discussed. But as it relates to AI, I think we're going to have to rely on what our strengths are in the West. And our strengths are about entrepreneurism and creativity and having 1,000 points of light and letting kind of this Darwinian process sort out who succeeds. But it needs to be supported. It needs to be led, just like with, JFK and getting to the moon.
Okay.
This is how we do it here. So I think this will be the ultimate test of two diametrically opposed political philosophies. And let's hope we do not lose this one, because if we do, it's not going to end well.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. I really appreciate
I
that.
apologize if I said anything politically incorrect in this audience.
I think that we should be a place where free speech and opinions are completely open.
This is kind of the home of political incorrectness, so I really do apologize.
I want to get back to the private sector, though, and in regard to kind of surviving digital transformation, somebody in the mid-levels of a company, how can they have a good impact toward digital transformation if you kind of have this lack of a visionary leader? Because that's sort of, I think a lot of people find themselves in that spot.
Well, let's not forget, why we were trained, okay, why we went to high school and why we went to college, okay? And I don't think we went to college to learn skills, and we went to high school to learn skills. We went to college and we went to high school to learn how to learn. And now this is the time to do it. And there is a great wealth of information immediately available to middle management, whether it's in books in Amazon or whether it's in Coursera courses, but all of these technologies are being, from some of the, greatest experts, in the world, like, Chris Manning, who is probably the foremost expert in, natural language processing on the planet. And they're taking everything they know and making it available to everybody in the world on these courses on, Coursera and edX and what have you, in a way that's accessible and palatable. So people in middle management need to take the initiative and, go online, start reading books. There's a book out there called, by Pedro Domingos. What is this called? Chris, remind me, Pedro's book from University of Washington. It's called, it's a really good book.
The Master Algorithm.
The Master Algorithm. Thank you. Okay. The Master Algorithm. It's a great book, people. Okay. And if you read this, you will understand what really fundamentally artificial intelligence is all about. I think there's a book out there by a mutual friend by the name of a friend of many people here, Roger McNamee, called Zucked. Okay. That talks about how AI is being abused by the social media companies, and it really is being abused, okay, to manipulate, say, 2.2 billion people at the level of the limbic brain. The limbic brain is that portion of the brain that we kind of have in common with a lizard, okay? And it deals with the stuff of survival, like food, water, sex. Again, it releases a neurotransmitter called dopamine. And this is how we learn to repeat things that result in the perpetuation of the species. And so this is the pleasure center of the brain. And you'll learn that these social media companies have figured out how to use computers to, manipulate people at the level of the limbic brain. And so the use of these various kind of social media technologies becomes very addictive. Okay. And resulting in, and the health consequences of what's happening are just, really deleterious in what is happening, for example, to young people today, in intolerance of ideas that are different than their own, because they live in what they call these filter bubbles, self-image problems, depression, loneliness, suicide. It's tragic. And then we have the operators of these social media companies who are looking the other way as these technologies are being co-opted by bad actors. They're being weaponized, okay, to manipulate political systems, whether it's Brexit, okay, in England, or whether it's the election cycles in the United States. Everybody knows it's going on and nobody's doing anything about it. And this fundamentally raises the question of whether we will be able to operate a democratic state in the future. And so this is really serious stuff. Yeah. You look at what's going on, in some parts of Asia, in countries that will remain unnamed, where we have, social compliance scoring. I mean, and, soon this is going to happen in the Western world. This is really scary stuff. Be afraid, people. And, this is an area that, I candidly, have almost no use for government and not a big government guy. But in my opinion, this like the Gutenberg Press, like the steam engine, like the transistor. Okay, AI is a technological advance that is going to bring enormous social and economic benefit. It's also going to result in, enormous deleterious social and political consequences. We can anticipate and prevent those consequences if we regulate. Okay. And nobody's got less use for regulation than Tom Siebel. Okay. Okay. But if we fail to regulate, we will be very sorry because we're going to have to live there. And
I think those are also important comments.
The idea that these companies are going to regulate themselves, I mean, forget that. I mean, see Facebook for details. And this is in my opinion, a legitimate role of government.
So I think that's really good. And as you're going along, Tom, I have to say that you're answering a lot of the questions that the audience is asking. So I'm not going to repeat questions that you've already addressed. But one of the things about AI adoption is kind of the quality of the AI itself. And I'm curious if you would comment on ML ops and auto ML tools that are aiming at making the creation of AI models or programming in AI accessible outside the very small world of data scientists and data engineers. Do you think we'll get better AI as a result, or do you think this is going to be an issue?
No, we will see the democratization of AI, okay, where AI is not only available to data scientists, but it's a tool that's available to business people and analysts. So unquestionably, this is the next big move in AI. When we talk about quality of AI, I think we need to be careful how we use AI. There really are enormous ethical issues associated with AI in not only what I've talked about in social media, but in government processes and in industrial processes. Let's think about, when we're dealing with physical systems, okay, and we're only dealing with telemetry, say from a machine, where we're dealing with temperature, rotational velocity, torque, altitude, airspeed, whatever it might be. There we can build AI models, okay, be they supervised learning or unsupervised learning models that are highly precise, that will predict, say, device failure, when something needs to be replaced, what have you. And I think there really are not ethical issues there. I think that's just a no-brainer, and it's all kind of motherhood and apple pie. I think when we think about the intersection, however, of AI with social systems, we need to be very careful. We need to be careful about ethical issues, privacy issues, and we need to be careful about bias. Let's talk about this example that I addressed earlier with the benefits of precision medicine, the social and economic benefits of AI, of precision medicine will be calculable, but I mean, significantly non-zero. These will be staggering. Okay. At the same time, let's think this through. Okay. Our healthcare provider, whether we have a single healthcare provider as a single care system, as many states do, or whether it's a health insurance company, let's play this forward a few years. Okay. This healthcare provider will know with high levels of precision who's going to be diagnosed with what disease in the next 5 years. They will know which one of us is going to be diagnosed with a terminal illness, for example. Now, how are they going to use those data? I mean, do you want to know that you're going to be diagnosed with a terminal illness? I mean, I'm not sure I do. And how are they going to use these data, be it a public sector organization or a private sector? And I don't know who to mistrust more, okay? Because you can't trust either one of them. But let's think about this. Will these data be used to ration healthcare? Absolutely. Okay. Who cares about, will it be used to set rates? Absolutely. And who cares about pre-existing conditions when we know what you're going to be diagnosed with in the next 3 or 4 years? So there's enormous ethical issues there. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's get to let's think about a lot of people want to apply. There's a lot of places, about the perpetuation of social bias. Okay? This is a real problem when we apply AI to societal systems. And, for example, a lot of people want to apply AI to human resource systems. For example, I was with one of the undersecretaries of one of our branches of defense in my office a few months ago, and we do a lot of work with this agency. And they wanted us to build an HR system for that agency that would use AI to determine who to promote, who to assign, to what billets and what have you. And I said, Mr. Secretary, this is a mistake. We won't do it. And I recommend that you not do it also, because I can tell you what this AI system is going to conclude. I can save us the year of building the models. The person you're going to sign, the person you're going to promote is white, male, went to West Point. Okay, now, is this really what you want? Because if you do it, you're going to have to read about yourself on the front page of the New York Times, and you're going to be dragged before Congress for congressional hearings, and rightfully so. So there are, we get into criminal justice, we get into systems associated with facial recognition. This is very scary stuff. And, we need to be afraid about the perpetuation of social bias. We need to be afraid about, I talked about the healthcare systems. And so while this is an extraordinarily powerful technology that will result in enormous good economic benefit and social benefit, there are some just landmines here that we know they're there. And let's just, why step on them or allow somebody else to step on them for us, be it a government agency or the private sector.
So let me ask you, what do you think is the best way to solve these problems and make sure that AI is used appropriately? Stanford has created this Human AI Institute. And so you've got the university sector doing university work on the one hand, but this is a pretty universal challenge. What are ways that we can have a good influence?
Well, I think with the work that's being done at Stanford by John Etchemendy and Chris Manning and others with this institute is very important. And I think we'll see similar and hopefully other leading educational research institutions love to copy Stanford. So you can be sure they're going to do that. Okay. And so that's a good thing. But it needs to be openly discussed. It needs to be recognized as important. And we need to be able to have an open and candid dialogue about it. Okay. And it can't be, which is something, in November of 2020, we're actually not very good at, is having open, candid dialogues about in areas where, people have honest disagreement and different perspectives. One of this invariably degenerates into some sort of ad hominem argument or what people are, we need it needs to be discussed. It needs to be put on the agenda. It needs to be recognized as important.
Okay, so kind of changing topics, you've structured C3.ai really as a platform that would enable a company to do digital transformation, to adopt the kind of storage and processing, advanced work with AI and so forth. I wonder if you would tell a little bit about where you see the company going.
Well, at C3AI, we've spent the last decade and approaching $1 billion, okay, building a software platform that allows organizations to rapidly design, develop, provision, and operate these enterprise AI applications in a wide range of industries: travel, transportation, government, oil and gas, utilities, manufacturing, aerospace, in a wide range of use cases. This is, a very large addressable market. I have been very fortunate in my career to have been involved in the development of new technologies. I was involved in the introduction of relational database technology to the market in the 80s with Oracle. At Siebel Systems, we invented this market that you know of today as customer CRM, or customer resource management. That was about the application of information technology and communication technology to the business processes of sales, marketing, and customer service. And that was quite an experience. And so now we're involved in this emerging market of helping companies, successfully and ethically apply AI to societal and business processes. It's enormously challenging, enormously rewarding. I think this looks like an entire replacement market for everything that's been done in enterprise application software in the last 3 decades. So it's a large market opportunity. I get the opportunity to engage every day with some of the brightest people in the world in this field, like John Etchemendy and Chris Manning and Anantha from MIT and Shankar Sastry from Berkeley and what have you. So, we're going about establishing a leadership position in this field and working with leaders of governments and leaders of some of the most, iconic companies in the world to help them digitally transform. So I've been, very fortunate in my career to be involved with, exciting new technologies in rapidly growing markets. But nobody's ever seen anything like this. This is a real big one, and it's really hard, and it's really exciting, and it's really challenging. So, we're just kind of going about our business one company at a time, and it's very rewarding. And let me say also, as you can tell, I'm a little bit outspoken, and I have some pretty well-formed views on what's important. And I think that business leaders, there are ethical problems here that are really daunting, and we need to stand up to that. We need to stand up to these ethical issues, or else we're going to have to live in an incredibly dystopian place. And so I think that I really hope personally that I'll be able to have an impact on that dialogue. Sometimes I get to talk to my friends at Stanford about this, and I think they're doing really important work.
So this is really about people kind of not appreciating the full impact that converting the whole world into digital data can have on their lives. And I think that this is a really good message to come out of this series, how important it is to look at the ethics. Kind of going back to the business side, what do you think are the kind of classic mistakes that companies make when it comes to trying to get more value from their digital data?
I think when they're trying to boil the ocean, or they're working on these kind of moonshot 5, 6, 7 year, multi-billion-year projects. I mean, if you're not going to get economic return in 6 months, you shouldn't be doing it. If you're involved in a project that's take 3, 4, or 5 years, you could forget it, because the time you get it done, the market will have changed and that problem won't be there anymore. I think that, many companies are, and this has been true throughout the history of information technology, where companies spent, enormous amount of time and effort and cycles trying to do things that they had no business doing. I remember when we brought relational database to market in the 80s at Oracle. And, the time when I first got involved with Oracle, it was about a $2 million business. I can assure you it's a lot larger than that today. And the competition, when people were considering purchasing relational database technology from Oracle or IBM or others, the alternative was to build it themselves. I mean, many IT organizations spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to build their own relational database systems. I mean, what on earth were they doing that for? And how many companies succeeded at it? Oh, that would be none. Okay. And then when we brought enterprise application software to market in the 90s in the form of ERP systems and CRM systems and others, many IT organizations tried to build these systems themselves and spent many years and hundreds of millions of dollars trying to build CRM systems and ERP systems. How many companies succeeded at building their own ERP system that worked? That would be none. And now as we get into AI and building these AI platforms, the natural reaction is the CIO will try to, take, 30,000 people in Bangalore, or even worse, 30,000 people, 3,000 people, say, distributed across, 12 time zones in 4 continents, and try to build these, massive, AI platforms. And the probability that an IT organization is going to succeed at that, I mean, it's zero. You can think of IT organizations. These people are trained as pilots, okay? They're trained to fly airplanes, okay? And they can be, they know about aerodynamics, they know about lift, they know about propulsion, they know about weight and balance, and they're trained to fly airplanes. Every now and then they get confused and they think that they're aerospace engineers, and they think they can design, the next, Airbus 320. And candidly, they're trained to fly them. They're not trained to build them. And so that's the classic problem we see. And, virtually every one of our customers tried to build the system themselves once, twice, or 3 times before they decided to go with a enterprise company. But this has been the same throughout the history of information technology. So there's no news here. But that's the classic mistake that companies make.
Okay. We've got a mixed audience and we're kind of getting short on time. So I'd kind of like to close up with a question about advice for the students in our audience. If they're looking ahead at their careers, what kind of suggestions would you have to them to live through this era of great change and be maximally successful?
Become proficient in data science. I mean, understand what this is about. Become proficient in the fundamentals of AI. Okay, if you are going to succeed in your career, whether it be it in manufacturing, be it in medicine, okay, be it in travel transportation, be it in social work, okay, if you're going to be successful, it is going to be essential that you be conversant in these technologies. Okay, you're a student, you're bright, okay, your brain works at you have synapses firing an order of magnitude greater rate than old guys like me and Chris Manning, and use those skills. Pick up some books, become familiar with data science, become familiar with statistics, and become familiar with computer science, because if you are not conversant in these technologies, you will not be able to play the game at a high level.
I think that's really great advice, regardless of the field. I mean, here Chris started off by saying that all 3 of us started out in the humanities and sciences, right? And so really, no matter whether you're studying history or whether you're studying linguistics or whatever, to have an understanding of the kind of analysis that is done and is possible using data science is a critical point, and inform those fields, the data science fields, also with the sense of ethics and human knowledge that comes from the fields outside of data science. Thanks so much, Tom. It was a wonderful presentation today. This was a fabulous keynote to really get the tone for our entire series this fall. For everybody, if you go to our website, asia.stanford.edu, you can see the videos and slides of pretty much every session in the series. And so we'll call an end to the formal part of the seminar right now.